It's Tuesday, September 4th. Even as the Supreme Court hears a plea filed by over 700 army men challenging the filing of police cases against them for operations in areas where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, or AFSPA, is in force, the Army Chief has questioned the need for serving officers to move the Supreme Court on matters related to insurgency-affected areas. The Army was fighting these cases. Now if these guys, the petitioners in court, lose the case, what will happen? General Rawat reportedly asked at a meeting of officers of colonel rank. Meanwhile, the Indian Express reports that as many as 107 Army personnel from the unit being commanded by a colonel booked by the CBI at the end of July for a fake encounter in Manipur are among the signatories of this petition in the Supreme Court. The petition states that registration of FIRs against Army personnel was against the provisions of AFSPA, as the Act grants immunity to them against the prosecution for actions performed during official duties. Army personnel are being prosecuted for alleged excesses and fake encounters, such as in Manipur. The Supreme Court had in July last year ordered a CBI probe into the alleged extrajudicial killings by the Army, Assam Rifles and Manipur Police in Manipur. A public interest litigation had alleged over 1,500 extrajudicial killings in Manipur between 2002 and 2012 by security forces and the state police. The centre had told the Supreme Court that of the 282 cases sent to it for verification, 70 cases were found to be related to the Army and Assam Rifles, and the rest to the state police. In a blow to press freedom, a court in Myanmar has sentenced two Reuters journalists to 7 years in prison for violating the official State Secrets Act while investigating the Rohingya killings. Wa Lon and Kyoso U were detained in Myanmar in December 2017. At the time of their arrest, they had been working on an investigation into the killing of 10 Rohingya men and boys in a village in Myanmar's Rakhine state. This chilling photograph of 10 Rohingya handcuffed, awaiting summary execution by the Myanmarese military, was obtained by the journalists. The report published by Reuters in February pieces together what happened in the village of Indin in the days leading up to the killing of the 10 Rohingya, 8 men and 2 high school students in their late teens. This is what the story says. Until now, accounts of the violence against the Rohingya in Rakhine State have been provided only by its victims. The Reuters reconstruction draws for the first time on interviews with Buddhist villagers who confessed to torching Rohingya homes, burying bodies and killing Muslims. This account also marks the first time soldiers and paramilitary police have been implicated by testimony from security personnel themselves. Members of the paramilitary police gave Reuters insider descriptions of the operation to drive out the Rohingya from Indin, confirming the military played the lead role in the campaign. It was the investigation into this massacre that led to the arrest of the 2 reporters. A United Nations report last week called for Myanmar's top generals to be prosecuted for
genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes.
The report charged Myanmar's civilian leader, Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, of failing to use her moral authority to prevent violence against the Rohingya. The exquisitely detailed sarcophagus of Shah Amun Emsu, a 3,000-year-old Egyptian priestess-singer whose coffin has never been opened. The 12,000-year-old skeleton of Lucia, the oldest skeleton ever found in the Americas. The largest meteorite ever discovered in Brazil. Everyday objects salvaged from the ruins of Pompeii and from Andean civilizations like the Inca and the Nazca cultures are all artifacts of history that may be lost forever, as Brazil's National Museum in Rio de Janeiro went up in flames Sunday night. The blaze engulfing 20 million rare items of history housed inside the museum. Established in 1818, the National Museum is housed in what was once the palace of the Portuguese royal family. Though a heritage site, the museum has suffered from years of neglect under numerous governments, repair work including a fire system overhaul being long due, reported Reuters. As burnt pages of history wafted out of the burning palace, Brazil's president tweeted, 200 years of work, research and knowledge were lost. It's a sad day for all Brazilians.
One of the things I remember was when I became aware of the fact that we are inferior. I was barely like 2 or 3 years old. I knew that somehow we were different. I didn't think of myself as a writer at all. It's actually what happened was I was trying to figure out why some people are untouchables and why the others are not, and how does one become an untouchable. And I sort of like, like how the detectives do, there's a board and they put victim and suspect and you connect the lines. So that's what I was trying to do, to try to figure out the relation between caste and wealth and social power and religion. It became only bad when I went to college. And it always happens that higher the education level Dalits go, the more casteism they experience. In villages, it's like very direct. They'll say, what caste are you? And in fact, by tradition, you cannot refuse to answer. So this beating around the bush happens in the urban settings. The village setup is actually a caste setup. There is no difference. Village means caste. So there is like no escaping it. And villages are crucibles of caste system and casteism. And urban areas are not so much like that. But what happens in the rural area, it reflects in the way Dalits are treated in urban areas. I mean, what happens to students like Rohit is only a different form of what happens to Dalits in the rural area. That's a physical violence where they kill them. This is mental torture where they drive you to kill yourself, but it's one and the same. When I was growing up, my mother would tell stories about him and how heroic he was, how witty he was, and how clever, and all that stuff. And it really impressed us, and I think especially me. And then she would take us to movies. There is a legendary figure named Alluri Sitaram Raju in Andhra, and there was a movie about him, and she took us to that movie. And while going, she said like, "Oh, your uncle is like him," So we grew up like thinking of all these great things about him. He was like star in the sky for us. And I remember like thinking that like when I grow up, I have to go to jungles and live hard life, and so I must prepare right now, practice how to live hard life. And I would like try to sleep on bare floor and things like that. I'm not squeamish about violence. It depends on who's perpetrating on who and for what purpose. Trotsky, he was a general of the Red Army. He said the only war that is justified is that of the slaves against slave owners. So I don't think violence is bad, and violence by slaves on slave owners is justified. But at the same time, violence is not... It's not because of squeamishness about violence that I disapprove of it, but it's failure. For example, the guerrillas, and they have weapons and everything, but what did they achieve? Nothing. That's because the state has the monopoly on means of violence. Like if they can have AK-47s or some bombs, but the states can have nuclear bombs, right? So that is not the right path to liberation. That's my first objection. It's not because violence per se, but it's the futility of it. I viscerally detest Mayawati and BSP, including Kanshiram. I mean, when they say that they're Dalit parties, what they're saying is, we come to power because of Dalit votes, not because we will do things for Dalits. That is the reason they're called Dalit parties. And they have done nothing, and there is proof in numbers. What did they do in terms of land question for Dalits? And UP is one of the states where most violence against Dalits takes place. And Mayawati held power there. What did she do? Nothing. And she is corrupt, and she's seeking personal adoration from the followers. She aggrandized herself, and her brother enriched himself. I just completely detest them. There is also some kind of like ideological incentive that if you're so outcast and not part of the main society, becoming part of the main dominant social culture is a lure for them. Like, oh yeah, I can also be part of them. And so they join that stuff. But what happens is, they're all Hindus. Like they tell them that you are Hindu, we are Hindu, so we're the same, but it's not the case. And so they say that the Muslims are outsiders. What happens when they deal with all of the Muslims? Then what happens? Would they need to woo the Dalits anymore? They won't. And even now, when they need to woo Dalits for electoral purposes and for attacks on Muslims, they're simultaneously perpetrating atrocities on Dalits, like while luring them with money and you're part of our society. At the same time, they're perpetrating crimes such as the ones in Una. If I were a sociologist or some kind of political analyst, I should be looking at some concrete things to compare them and say whether they're similar or dissimilar. But it's my gut feeling and involuntary reaction when I saw racism against blacks that I felt that this is very much like caste. First of all, both discriminations are based on who you were born to. In India, it's if you're born to a Dalit family, then you are a Dalit. In America, if you're born to a person who came from Africa, then you're black, no matter how light your skin is. So because of that, I see a similarity between caste and race. And second thing is segregation. Jim Crow, there was segregation, but even after Jim Crow is dismantled, unofficially and informally, there's always discrimination. Housing discrimination against blacks. It's pretty routine. So these two features make me think that caste very much looks like race. For Telugus, there are like at least 5 or 6 different immigrant associations, and each is dominated by one caste. There is one association dominated by Kamma caste and Reddis and then Brahmins. And so it's just a cover. But then again, there are certain others that openly call themselves Telugu Brahmin Association. And I sent them a request to let me join their group. And they asked me for Gotra and this or that. I said, I'm a Mala from untouchable community, and they never wrote me back. So they had all these vile stuff to say about me. I read some of those, but otherwise I didn't read much. Yeah.
The one that you're perhaps not acknowledging that things have changed in India in the last 20, 30 years since you left India, and that your book sort of plays into the stereotype that the West would like to believe about India. Like, what would you say to that?
What nonsense. Look around you, how would you say? I mean, you open the papers, you will see at least one news about an atrocity, a Dalit woman raped or somebody murdered, and students like Rohit being hounded out. When all this is happening, how do they say that there is no casteism?